Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Venture Stories by Village Global. I'm here today joined by a very special guest, Scott Heiferman, co-founder of Meetup. Scott, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks.
We're here to talk about all things community building. But first, let's take a little step back. Why don't you give a brief background or overview of yourself and your mission and how you got into it and where you're at now?
Sure. You know, Meetup uses the internet to get people off the internet. We've been around for quite a while and somehow have stayed growing and growing. The mission is, even though, you know, we might go, out of style and back into style a little bit, you know, as anything does through the years, but company is set up, you know, very mission driven for the long haul and with the goal of bringing people together in real life to create, you know, human connection, real community, make people stronger.
And when you talk about community, people use communities in a lot of different ways. How do you define community and how does that differentiate, or are there different types of communities? How do you differentiate between them and how do those differentiate from things like networks or things that aren't exact or are more other things than they are communities?
Yeah, I love that question because it's both it's one part pet peeve, but other part, you know, just kind of inspiration to try to make that distinction and to actually have the word community mean something as opposed to how it's often used or the myriad of ways in which it's used and kind of loses any real meaning. From my perspective, community is what happens when people talk and form relationships and come to have some kind of interdependency. And I keep telling myself not to use, you know, academic-y, wonky words like that. But basically it comes down to, are people forming relationships and having like the kind of connections where where they really find support. You know, at the end of the day, it's about, you know, is capacity revealed? Is possibility unleashed? You know, are people brought together? In the Meetup context, you know, there's no virtual meetups. There's not that people can't form real relationships and real community purely digitally, but, you know, our bet is that you're most likely to form the kinds of, community and connection if there's at least some part of that relationship in real life. So that's what we are optimizing for.
And, you know, we've had communities since forever. And at the beginning, perhaps it was more tribal, and you and your 10 or 15 people or whatever amount of people that were closest to you, it was really driven by proximity. And then over time with markets and trade and transportation, you became more movable and were able to switch and evolve communities. And then with the internet was really a Cambrian explosion of, oh wow, you know, infinite number of communities to choose from and pick from. You know, zooming out, how do you sort of see how community has evolved over time?
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, we can all read Sapiens and have this picture in our head of what a tribe might have been and thousands of years ago, and this is all. I mean, I love that you're asking that, and people are more so than in the past asking these kinds of questions and trying to picture in their head, what do humans need, and what is community, and what value does it have? You know, I'm not here to like judge people's lives and to say that, oh, you know, if you're just living on Twitter, that's not real community, or you know, or there's some ideal balance of, you know, the amount of time you might spend in front of a screen versus, you know, face to face with people. All I know, Erik, is that the fact that I got a regular lunch thing going with a bunch of friends and a regular breakfast thing going with a bunch of friends, and there's a sense of, not just a sense of, actually more important, that's really important, and not just think of it as a sense of, but that, are you literally meeting up with a group of people that where you can support each other and help each other and just shoot the shit with each other and be there for each other? You know, like, I could rattle off all the stats about loneliness or the ways in which people don't have the support that they need. They might have a life filled with friends, but family and but the idea of feeling lonely about something that's important to you, like, oh, I'm really interested in the future of consumer social, so like, have you found your people? And so I guess, but the important, the kind of radical or important thing I want to say here is, and the reason why I bring up the, like, hey, I have a weekly lunch with a bunch of friends, I have a monthly breakfast with a bunch of different friends, is that and it's not that, like, I mean, I am blessed and rich with, having been so lucky as to make a few friendships in my life, but it was like an actual effort to say, like, no, we're going to get lunch weekly. And the point here also is to say, yeah, of course, we all have, we know people everywhere, and, there's the death of distance, and absolutely do I feel like my friendships that are scattered around the world are real friendships and real people who I might really count on. But I'll tell you what, if there really is nothing like, being in a place, living in a place, perhaps that's a city, and knowing that, that you're a messaging away, that you're a text away or whatever, or use your messaging service of choice to say that there's actually put aside the messaging even for a second, just the power of the way a running club helps you run, the power of a writing group to help you write, the power of a book club to get you reading. These can all be virtualized, but there's just something powerful in the local, in real life. And that's not to say that there isn't value in, like, virtual and all other forms of, community or pseudo community, but I'm a big advocate for people having a real local community in their life.
Yeah. And there seems to be this question about, or this sort of ineffable quality about face-to-face that digital can't replicate, that what we are trying to in multiple areas of our life, remote or work or distributed work, for example. At the same time, despite platforms like Meetup, it seems that the inexorable trend is even more and more, or less and less face-to-face as virtual reality, gets better and technology gets better. Do you think that the gap between face-to-face digital will ever be small enough for it to be worth it? Like, in a decade from now on meetup.com, are most of the meetups going to be virtual meetups, or how do you see that evolving? And I mean, when virtual reality is almost as good as the real thing, and you won't be able to notice, will there be still a big difference, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, I'm a technologist. I love technology. I love innovation. I love the internet. I think it will never get small enough. So the good news is that, and I have been wrong about, I think that the virtual is better than I thought, and will only get better, and it will get, in measurable ways, it'll get close to in real life, but it will never replace in real life. It's one way to think about it is, I'm a fan of Michael Pollan, in his book. Well, he's got his drug book, but then he's got, his food books. And he would talk about, on the food side, he would talk about how, take a carrot. Stop me, Eric, if this is something that people like heard many times, but, you can break down, the greatest science can break down what's inside a carrot and try to recreate it in a vitamin, or give you what is supposedly all good in the carrot. But the carrot has evolved to have just this multitude of components that we just can't put our finger on yet, or may never. And it's the combination of all these organic pieces that make the carrot something special. Now, what's my point? My point is that, maybe it's obvious. Is that no, I don't think that we're going to replace in real life. And I would go so far as to say, and why should we? Like, what is the race to try to make virtual as real as possible? I get it. It's like if grandma wants to, FaceTime with the grandkids, maximum closeness to in real life, that technology is super great. And, I don't want to get into kind of theological or other philosophical discussions here, but, okay, so you can soylent yourself through existence, well, okay, what's wrong with food again, or what's wrong with in real life? I was going to say, we're playing with fire, meaning like this is not like sort of nice, having a sense of belonging, a sense of being needed, a sense of connection, looking into people's eyes and feeling sense of wholeness. These are not these are not nice to haves. These are need to haves.
And it reminds me of the book Tribe. Yeah, which for the audience sort of is about a person, Sebastian Junger, who goes to war and sort of explores why in the military and in wartime, even though it's such a tough time, there's a sense of belonging and community and mission, and everyone feels needed. And when you get out into the real and free world, there's sort of a loss of that. And he lost more people in his troop outside of the war than in the war. And it was sort of a macro exploration of is our technological and maximize economic growth world, to what extent is it compatible with a world of community and belonging and meaning? How did you respond to that book, given your purview?
I've been kind of swimming in these questions. I'm like, I was not some natural born communitarian who really gave a shit about, a lot of these topics or questions. I stumbled on it. I was off, I was one of the early people in the online advertising world, and not thinking about the power of tribes or tribalism or local community. And so, there's a whole story of how I got called into all this, but what I found was, so basically my answer is that, there was something really powerful in that book and the way he wrote it, but it's also have been lucky to have found out sort of a calling and been thinking a lot about it. I bet, Eric, there are some people who have listened to this podcast so far and they're kind of like, okay, got it. I get what Scott's talking about. They can kind of check that box and agree or, disagree or whatever and kind of move on and listen to the next podcast. I think though that this is you're talking about ventures and you're talking about technology and we're talking about the things that I think people tune in to hear about and what I'm, most kind of possessed by and fascinated by. So, okay, I played for a while with this question of how does technology get people, off technology and in real life community. But I think we've barely begun, all the ways in which technology and connected computers basically can bring people together we've barely begun. And so, that's, maybe the reason why I even bother to join you on this conversation and for others to listen in is that I really hope people are taking on the challenge of how do you use technology to bring people together in fresh ways, all through the 2020s and beyond.
Yeah. And let's talk more about that. What do we expect to see in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of if we've just begun, what's left to do or what's your request for experimentation? What do you want to see people be doing and experimenting with?
Oh man. Well, it's what's left to do. Everything is left to do. I feel like, for all we're really proud of what we built at Meetup and, but it barely scratches the surface and it was not that long ago that, you couldn't press a button and make a car show up and now you can, the whole, the idea of how can you press a button and make people show up is, we have a whole, kind of universe in front of us. I don't know, wherever I look, I just see this kind of open canvas, on that challenge. Whether that is, listen, I had a friend who had a liver transplant in Orlando a couple of years ago. And, I asked him, I said, oh, are you able to meet anyone who has, kind of also gone through that surgery? And he's like, no. And, I'm like, well, surely there's gotta be a Facebook group that has all the people going through liver transplants. And, it's this kind of smattering of stuff here and there. But just at the end of the day, it's there is a huge canon of research that basically says that if, just pregnant women, meet with a dozen other pregnant women throughout their, monthly throughout their pregnancy, they have something like a 30 to 35% less chance of having a premature birth.
Wow.
Which is, and from diabetes to all, just across a whole spectrum of health conditions, there's AA, Alcoholics Anonymous was a discovery. It was a eureka moment. It was this, and it doesn't cure alcoholism, but but it works. It does something of value. And so the fact that that was a discovery and yet there's no one who's, so again, my friend who had this liver transplant, I mean, no one's who's helping him connect with other people, in the right context. I mean, does it have a facilitator? Does it not? Does it, is it just like, is a Facebook group good enough? Is a meetup group good enough? I don't know. There's a lot to figure out there, but most importantly, it's a network question. It's one of those like Lyft or Uber could only work when there's, enough riders and enough drivers in that marketplace to facilitate those connections. And I think that there's just, from a whole spectrum of different parts of life, there's, we really have barely begun to, connect people locally and otherwise, who would like to find each other and could really help each other by being connected.
Yeah, it's interesting. One angle looking at it is that we used to get most of our community needs met through sort of this bundle that was religion, that was church or mosque or temple or whatever it is. And then that sort of became more modularized over time. Maybe Alcoholics Anonymous was one of the first examples of it, although it does have religious overtones. How do you think about sort of the modularization of community over time, and especially from your purview at Meetup? What are a lot of the meetups sort of religious or religious replacement, like people going to Soul Cycle or going to things like that, Daybreaker, things like that? How do you think about this sort of modularization of community?
We could get into this one all day. I'm fascinated by it. If people listening, they might want to look up howwegather.org. There's this couple folks out of the Harvard Divinity School who did a deep dive over the past few years looking into these, some of the questions that you're asking, and written up some really interesting reports at howwegather.org. But yeah, Erik, early days in Meetup, I got the chance to, do a dive into the world of Rick Warren and the kind of super mega church, world that was kind of emerging around 10, 15 years ago. And part of the inspiration for kind of in the early days of Meetup was realizing that, people, if you want to be part of a little league in a town where the super church is dominant, the only little league is no longer coming from the kind of sort of organic secular municipality or just like a bunch of parents forming a little league, but it's coming out of a church. And, and that's great it's great that, anyone has the opportunity for that little league, and it's great that the church organizes it. But I think there is this question of, do people feel powerful? Do they have access to simple secular community or, religious community, whatever it is? I mean, the stats on religion are clear that, where people are feeling less connected and less engaged in religion. And I guess it's a kind of an age-old question, but are people going to religion more for salvation and God, or are they going for community? And I don't have the answer to that, but there's a fantastic book on the topic of what do people get out of religion, and it was really eye-opening to me. It's called Religion for Atheists by Alain de Botton, and he just makes this strong case that the belongingness and is such a huge part of the religious experience.
I think what might be most helpful is talking about the practice of community building, because nobody has a better purview about how in-person communities form, how they retain and scale or strengthen over time than you and Meetup do. Yeah. So maybe we talk about starting with how they form. I mean, how many meetups are there at meetup.com?
Well, first off, we're not meetup.com anymore. It's just Meetup. It's an app that, people use. We signed up 100 million people and organically. And there's about 10 to 20,000 meetups that happen every day, an average of about 8 to 12 people.
Oh, incredible.
And the thing we're most proud of, just to kind of get it out there, and I think is really, and I love sort of, saying this for anyone who might, be involved in any kind of venture and out there, is that, what we're most proud of is not that we're just some sort of like ticketing engine or RSVP engine or even like listing service for events or something like that. What we're really so kind of proud of at Meetup is that, of these 10 to 20,000 gatherings that happen every day, most of them just wouldn't be happening without without Meetup in the sense that it's kind of like the people who are using Instagram or, Snap or whatever. It's not like they wouldn't be like photo blogging, before, it's not, it's that it's kind of instigating and sparking something, people, in the case of Instagram, people are posting photos who wouldn't be like photo posting kind of people in the olden days. It's that they're reframing something as kind of like, so at Meetup, it's like the people who might be organizing a running meetup, for example. These are not like professional event organizers who are like looking for a platform to list their event or something. It's so anyway, it's really to always be doing something that you're creating some behavior that people wouldn't be doing otherwise. That's really
right.
That's what feels best in my sort of venture story.
Yeah, sort of like Uber is 3 times as big as the taxi market was by reducing friction to get in a car. Now more people want to do it, and you guys reduce friction to bring people together.
I'm sure there were VCs who were looking at the Uber business plan and saying like, oh well, the market size for taxis is X, so I don't think we could get more than 12% of that market. But yeah, to expand a market, to really and to create behavior, that's the heart of changing society, which is the point.
Yeah. So what does need to be true, and you guys probably be the first people to do it, for there to be a sort of, you press a button and you bring people together? And I know you're almost there in some ways, but what needs to be true for the next step function?
Well, I guess I could hit on 2 points there. One is classic, network density. So, to just realize that, when people opened the Uber or the Lyft app when they were first coming out, they opened the app and it said, okay, great. It takes 14 minutes to get a car, because there's only so many cars, and classic marketplace, there weren't enough drivers because there weren't enough cars, not enough drivers. And you could say, oh, well, this product, I think you're a product person. The product is a 14-minute wait for a car. Like, how good is that? Not very good. So who cares? When I look at like the running, I'm picking on running or pick any meetup category, that there's a lot of, so the first answer is just network density. Is that finishing my point? Uber and Lyft, it was only when the network was revved up and that 14 minutes to get a car went down to 2 minutes to get a car. And that's that's the kind of step function in product experience. At the end of the day, product is not just about the UI, of course, and the design you could have the most beautiful like marketplace app, but it's crap if there's no the marketplace isn't dense with inventory, with sellers and buyers, whatever. So anyway, so one thing is just, I think that when we go through a cultural, societal sort of change to openness around a more we type culture, a more as basically it becomes more normalized for people to say, oh, I want to write a book, so I'll join a writing club. It'll get me in a habit of writing every week, and people will come for that benefit. There'll be a sense of community and all that. Or multiply that by just dozens of different kinds of meetup categories as people realize. Yeah, and also bringing to that healthcare example, as they realize like, oh, I have diabetes. If I join this local in real life community that gets together monthly and is structured in a certain way, my health outcome will be better because of it. As that becomes normalized, and the network gets denser. One thing we learned at Meetup, of course, is that you have to be really interested in something to go a far geographical distance to attend. But if you populate, if there's lots of meetups and there's one that's very close to you, you need to be less interested to kind of hit that tipping point to say, I'm going to go. And so naturally, as there's more and more gatherings and more quality and more everything, it just becomes more normalized, and then the network kind of just will rev up. I guess one other dimension on what creates a step function in a cultural shift towards dramatically more in real life community in the world. So one thing that we observed at Meetup was, and I'm borrowing a little bit from one of my ex-colleagues, Andres Guzman, and he talks about, and if I had to say what drove Meetup's growth more than anything, it's what we call cell dividing and spawning. And by that, I mean, someone will start a hiking meetup in a city, and it'll be successful. And then someone will say, okay, well, I want to have one on the north side of town, hiking on the north side of town. And then someone will say, great, I want one on the north side of town, but for women only. And then branching off from there, someone will say, I want a north side of town, women only, but it's just, women in their 20s. And then someone else will say, I want a lesbian women hiking meetup on the north side of town. And then in the lesbian meetup, someone will say, I want a couples only lesbian hiking meetup, because, I don't want this to be a meat market of a hiking meetup. And then off of that, someone will start, and this is a true example, someone will start the lesbian couples with dogs hiking meetup. Because, someone brought a dog, and then half the people don't want to be, around an annoying dog while they're hiking, but some people do. And so anyway, the moral of the story is, there's kind of this endless human need for, and this kind of does go to the tribal questions, both the good and the bad of the good and the bad of tribalism. But the point here is that the step function is in enabling that natural human tendency for that cell dividing and spawning, and perhaps augmenting it or assisting it along, or even, the fact that there's a confluence here with, that we're in an age of AI and machine learning to help along this cell dividing and spawning, so that people don't need to be, the act of starting a community is a really weird, hard, tough thing to do. The fact that hundreds of thousands of people have started meetup groups is still amazing to me. That I can't believe so many people have that courage. The goal is to say, the step function is to say, well, how do you make it so that it's just flat out easier and doesn't require as much extreme sort of talent or courage?
Totally. So let's talk about community health. What are signs that community is doing really well, or is going to do really well, that may not be super obvious? What have you learned from having so many meetups?
Yeah, we observed that it's probably in the millions, but seeing meetup communities fail and meetup communities succeed, there's a few things that we through data observed. One is that the regularity and routine of meeting up, of gathering, is important, or merely just the fact of taking that step of scheduling something. There's the old line, nothing happens until somebody sells something. I've come to believe that nothing happens until somebody schedules something. And, we all know this in our, just in our kind of personal lives. I mean, you could say to someone hey, we should get together, but to actually say, no, we're going to get together at this time. And so I think just the bold act of scheduling regularly and taking it to the next level, thinking of it as, around the natural human need for kind of ritual and rhythm, to say all right, we meet up every, the first Monday of every month or something of that sort is really powerful. Secondly is distributed leadership. We just know that, regardless of the size of a community, whether it's small or big, having multiple appointed leaders is more successful than fewer. And that's just kind of classic decentralized. And by the way, that's not to say that autocratic versus non-autocratic communities are more or less successful. We found that some of the most successful communities are highly autocratic, but yet distribute leadership, so that there's there's a hierarchy of in a hiking meetup, there's a director of welcoming, and there's a director of kayaking, and a director of new member safety, or whatever it might be. But again, it does to distribute leadership and be decentralized doesn't mean it necessarily is a total democracy. Although at the same time, some communities are successful being having a consensus based kind of democracy. But the point is if it is people want to be needed, they want to take responsibility, they want to be in charge of stuff. So, make people in charge of stuff. A third point is that of what we learned about successful community is that there's natural feedback loops. And I know that everything I'm saying is, I don't know, maybe it's obvious, it's not obvious, but I can say for sure that we know that when there's a rating system in place and people are able to give feedback that feedback loop just nets out in a stronger community. The last thing I would say is the kind of, and this is the more subtle, but the gentle balance of purpose and knowing who's in, but it's both purpose and kind of an exclusiveness. It's like knowing who's in and who's out. You want to be welcoming, you want to be open. You can succeed with saying, hey, this is a radically open and welcoming community. But what we have loved seeing, and what is so powerful when we have an incredible success, is when, and it cuts to the heart of some of these really intense, important kind of tribalism questions. And that is, you could say, we want, let's say a programmer community, but no noobs and only experienced people. And you can say, that is not inclusive of, that will sort of naturally not be inclusive of people who had sort of a historical bias or lack of access. And so what you're basically saying is like, not many women or not many people of color, because, you don't want people who are less experienced, and it just works out that that's the case. I think that to be actively and consciously saying that we are expressly open to anyone and everyone of sexual orientation or religion or race or whatever it might be, but define that, but it's okay to have a community where you need to have a certain, say, for example, a level of experience, and to, confront the inclusion questions right out there, I think is very healthy for a community.
I mean, how do you, is too much homogeneity or obviously too much, or too much diversity ever too much, or what's sort of the right balance? How do you think about that?
Well, Erik, there's the answer I could give that is of a purely growth hacking, near term type of answer. And then there's the answer I could give, which is really sort of important and powerfully nuanced. And I'll go in that latter direction. I think the days have come and gone for us as like technology builders to ignore our responsibility for making the world. I mean, from the oldest days of Silicon Valley, people have said, we want to make the world we want to live in. And I believe in the earnestness of that. But the reality is that a lot of technologies have, basically created the opposite, that we've, moved fast and broken things. And I mean, I'm proud that at Meetup, we've been building the kind of company, over a long history, and have sort of weathered lots of storms because we've been, far, far, far from perfect, but very conscientious about this. Anyway, Erik, my point here to answer your question about homogeneity and diversity and all is that if you're willing to make the effort and invest in truly kind of designing things to make the world that you want, to make the world you want to live in, and you do it with just a kind of genuine leadership, it may not be the most optimal from a near-term growth hacking measurement perspective, but it delivers in the long run. And I know I'm speaking in kind of vague terms here, but listen, it's like candy. It's cheap and easy to sort of say, we're going to be a community that is so exclusionary that it's going to get some like cheap wins on getting people feeling that a sense of belonging that is grounded in a sense of basically, are you grounded in fear or are you grounded in love? Sorry to go there on a kind of esoteric level like that, but I mean, really and truly, and you can point to how this works throughout history. That I mean, even just look at America as a country as a great experiment. Where it's like grounded in these basic principles of kind of love and welcomingness and belongingness, and out of that comes the internet. Out of that comes lots of good. Yes, there's lots of problems and some kind of rampant problems, but my point is that to be grounded in sort of first principles that are good principles, like saying we're going to go out of our way to be a diverse or inclusive community. I think produces, and by the way, just to clarify once again, when I say community, I don't mean like, I'm not talking like the Mark Zuckerberg use of the word community, where it's like our community of 2 billion people. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about literally like, how do a few dozen people get on together? You'd think that like, oh, I'm Scott, I'm like the Meetup guy, I must, be so, well, let me just get to the story. We want, we bring in Meetup organizers to tell their story to the team at Meetup. And, once we brought in the, Black vegan, I forget the exact name of the group, but it was African American vegan New York City Meetup. And this woman was just like so inspiring. She was saying, yeah, we welcome everybody. And it's like just this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful community. We get like, dozens of people, 50, 70 people showing up, and we take over a restaurant and it's on fire and it's alive. And I said to her, hey, listen, I hear your words, but really, come on. Like, I'm a non-vegan white guy. Am I, like if I show up at your Meetup, like you don't want me there. What are you talking about that you're open for everyone? She's like, no, I want you there. And we welcome, we bring people into our fold and we like turn them on, and people become vegans because they're so welcomed into this like little universe we've created. And then I'm just telling you, Eric, it's like for us, like kind of, I don't know, I'm like this Gen X, part cynical, ironic, person. And it's like, sometimes I sit back, I'm like, holy crap, what did we build here at Meetup? Like it really, when you bring people together, some of the most beautiful things emerge, and these beautiful characters emerge, and the best side of people emerge. And so, I say, man, go into it, any kind of community building with a kind of radical sense of openness or love. And it's like, stand back, like really amazing things can happen.
Yeah, that's inspiring. What separates the great communities on Meetup from the ones that aren't as successful or fold early? What about how they form, how they bring people together initially, and what about as they grow and maybe they scale or maybe they don't? You mentioned earlier the size is 8 to 12 people on average, maybe. But what can you talk about? What great communities have in common and what they do?
Yeah, so I mean, I think beyond the sort of regularly scheduling and even going and taking that even further to kind of ritualizing and defining the community by how they gather and when they gather and how they regularly gather. I think and in addition to also like the kind of distributing leadership, people taking roles, having real responsibilities, and I would add that there's to have a sense of purpose. I remember one of the Meetup groups that I ran was, the early, back in the day, the New York Tech Meetup. And now New York is a real place in our industry. And it didn't used to be. And I remember standing on stage at the New York Tech Meetup and saying this, kind of weird thing. I would say, we are the New York Tech community. And people kept would always cite that I would say that, and they would use that phrasing. And so I just think that very often people would think, they refer to, they say, oh, well, the JavaScript community of Portland, or, they refer to like that they're a part of some community, the Venture Stories community or something, but to really gather and then but basically to declare, to say, we are the fill in the blank community. It sounds subtle, but it's, it's kind of like saying, like, even if you're just like with a group of friends and you say, well, hey, or let's say you're in a family or something, what, I say to my kids, I say, well, we're the kind of people who do this, and so to define like, well, it's kind of a sense of purpose, a sense of defining your values. So a lot of community building is similar to company building, and that sort of canon of, whenever I look at industry stuff about like, oh, how do you build a great startup? I port that over and say, well, how do you build a great community? And likewise, there's this whole canon of like around community building. And one of my favorite books, frankly, about business or startups or community is a book about church building. The book is called The Purpose-Driven Church, which is basically like, it's about how like Christian pastors should plant and grow their church, and it's very different than as it would seem to have not much to do with all kinds of other community building or even startup or company building, but it's super relevant.
Yeah. And do you have a last quick line about the tensions of scale of, if there's a New York tech meetup, but then there's the sort of the Black vegan New York tech meetup, or like in the splintering, what happens to the New York tech meetup?
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I love all my babies equally. I don't have a preference, but but no, I'm just so excited and interested in the future of smaller communities. I think that and because at the end of the day, community is about people being seen, being heard. Community is about people sitting in circles, not sitting in rows. In other words, it's not about being an audience member and staring at a stage. It's about sitting in a circle, being in some kind of a circle where the other people actually see you and hear you, and you get to talk, and everyone hears each other, and everyone gets to talk, and everyone, has a sense of which out of that emerges, people actually caring about each other. Out of the whole world we're in, in the future of AI and the future of technology and the centralization of so much, the powerful platforms, the Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, all that stuff. It's self-driving cars and all this. It's like, at the end of the day, the thing that computers can't replace is actual caring. I tell my kids that Alexa doesn't love you. That no matter how good the computers get, the computers will not love you. They will not care about you. And, and I love my Alexa, and I'm not anti-technology, but like, know the difference between, where there's love and caring and where there's not. And when you're sitting in an audience, the person on stage, like I love, like I could watch Springsteen on Broadway endlessly, and I could actually start to think that like I really know Bruce Springsteen, and like, okay, maybe I know about Bruce Springsteen, but he doesn't know shit. He doesn't know me, and he never will know me, and he won't care about me, and he won't love me. And I'm not saying like that in a sad way. I'm saying like, okay, face reality. And frankly, most of my Twitter universe, like they don't really care about me. And so the moral of the story is, I don't really care about big communities because that's not where it's not at a human scale that's feasible for people to really care for people. I'm really into this simple question of, in the future, in the 2020s, in the 2030s, will people have a regular weekly gathering, a regular monthly gathering, whatever it is, with a bunch of the same people who share some kind of purpose of some sort, even if it's just friendship or some other something, and they come to really help each other and support each other. And that's just super mega scalable for a world and a society, and sounds completely obvious, but I think we are in and have the potential to be heading into a world where that's not a natural part of life. And it'd be great if it were.
God, that's a perfect place to end. I could talk to you for hours more. I hope this is the first conversation on the topic. I want to be sensitive to your time. Thanks so much for coming to the podcast.
Thanks, Erik.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Please hit us up at villageglobal.vc/network catalyst.